Hello, Lion families. This is Mr. Moeller here to talk to you just for a little bit about standards-based grading. Hopefully this video will last around 20 minutes or less, but there is a lot of ground to cover. First, let's talk about what we mean when we say standards. The state identifies the concepts that schools need to teach in the form of academic standards from OSPI. So those come from a variety of places, and then the state adopts those standards. So we have standards in areas of health, in fitness, in science, and math, and ELA, and all the other areas. When we talk about standards-based grading, it is really just the process of teaching students the academic standards and then collecting data on how well those students have progressed into to meeting those standards. The one significant difference between a traditional grading system and a standards-based grading system is that instead of then taking all of that data and mixing it together into one score for the entire class, each standard is going to get its own score and gets reported that way. So how does standards-based grading work? There are four main components in standards-based grading that you need to be familiar with to have a deep grasp of this. The first is identifying priority standards. Then we need to talk about proficiency scales. We're going to talk a little bit about assessments, and then we'll pull it all together and talk about how we determine what a score is. So first of all, let's talk about priority standards. So again, we talked about the standards that are communicated to us that we need to teach. But then, just through the natural progression through teaching the standards, there really is no way for us to cover everything to the same depth. So naturally, in any education system, prioritizing happens. It could happen sort of haphazardly in that maybe as a math teacher, I often wasn't able to finish the entire book, and so the last couple of chapters of the book, they just got left out, and the kids did not get that material. Sometimes it's strategically done, like identifying that maybe a chapter in the middle of a math book is going to be covered more in the next year, and so we strategically leave that out. It could have anything to do with a teacher's preference, maybe a passion towards a particular part of history. So one teacher in one class focuses a lot of time on World War II, while another teacher in the same subject really prefers to talk about World War I. They cover both, but one gets priority over the other. So this is something that just naturally happens, and essentially happens because some studies have been done, and if we were to teach everything that has been laid out for us from K through 12, it would take over 23 years of education to teach all that material to the same level. So clearly prioritizing has to happen. So over the past 5 years, we've been working with our partners across town at the other middle schools, and we've been researching and discussing and refining which standards really rise to that level of the most important ones in each course. And these are the standards which we have identified as priority standards. Now, this isn't to say that the other standards aren't taught or they're not important. They are. They just aren't assessed at the same level as our priority standards. The priority standards are the ones that would show up on your report card or on your progress report. And they are the ones that we will collect specific data on and report the growth of students on. So here is some examples. I will not read all of these of different priority standards. If you'd like a little bit more time looking at some of these, you can pause the video and take a close look. I just took a quick snapshot. The one thing I really want to point out about them is that by and large, the standard itself is written to a very high level. So let's just take a look at the science ones as an example. Life science. This is an example of a life science, I think out of 7th grade. Construct a scientific explanation based on evidence for the role of photosynthesis in the cycling of matter and the flow of energy into and out of organisms. That's a very high level standard. So just keep that in mind for the next part of our conversation. So again, certainly pause this and take a little bit longer if you'd like to look at it. The next step in standards-based grading is to develop what's known as proficiency scales. Each priority standard is analyzed to determine the individual concepts that comprise that standard. Those concepts are then placed into a table, much like the one to the right, and it's used to help both the student and the teacher progress through the learning. So at in Camas at the middle schools, especially specifically Liberty and Skyridge, these are the scores and their general meanings that we are using, and we'll go into a little more detail next. So let's look at the anatomy of a proficiency scale, and let's start at the most important level, which is level 3. Level 3 is meet standard. The language of the standard is always going to be at level 3. So when we go back and look at those high level standards, that is what we're trying to attain. That is the level 3. So in some generic language for a student, they should, if they're scoring at a 3, they should read that or interpret that as, I'm comfortable with this content or skill. I can show my understanding without assistance, and I only maybe make tiny little mistakes. I'm right where I'm supposed to be. So this is our goal. Here is a specific example from a science proficiency scale. You can see that the level 3, the standard has been broken into its individual components. And now a student can use this to track their progress into attaining these standards. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But this is the goal. This is where we're shooting for with this specific standard. In order to get to that standard, we have to learn some basic information. So that brings us to level 2, progressing towards standard. Now, these are specific skills and concepts that are necessary for a student to understand, to be able to grasp the level 3 part of the proficiency scale or the standard. And so again, what does this mean? I'm comfortable with parts of the content or skill. I can show my understanding of parts of what was taught, but maybe not all of it. Sometimes I'm independent. Sometimes I need help. I'm still working on it. When we look at a specific proficiency scale, here is the 2 for the level 2 for the one we just saw. So what is it? What goes at a level 2, and how do I know if I'm at a level 2? So the things that I need to be able to do is basically recognize or recall specific vocabulary. So for example, I'm going to go back to the 3. You notice on the 3, it talks about develop a model to describe or predict what happens with atoms and molecules. Well, we're not going to be able to do that high level thinking if we don't even know what an atom or a molecule is. So knowing the vocabulary is at level 2. Understanding some basic information about the atoms and molecules fits in here. If this was a math example, this might be where the basic formulas go and the vocabulary for that. And so you can see this is still high level information or important information, but without that knowledge, kids are going to have a very difficult time achieving a level 3. So when we look at these proficiency scales, we think about building them with the content in mind. And so we analyze what's in the standard and what it'll take for a kid to be successful at that standard. Those basic prerequisite skills and kind of lower level thinking, lower level on the Bloom's taxonomy, they go into a 2. And then the 3 is where we get into the higher level thinking that goes with the standard itself. So let's look at the other levels, and we'll start at the bottom. A 0 doesn't mean a 0. It doesn't mean you got nothing right. What a 0 is, we got to think about levels and not points. I didn't get 0 points. I'm at a level 0. And that basically means there isn't enough evidence for me to give you a score as a teacher. This could be for a number of reasons. It could be because the student did not attempt the standard, or I'm sorry, an assessment, and it could also mean that the answer was so far from what was asked that it doesn't look like I have any evidence of you knowing anything. So insufficient evidence means just that. I don't have any evidence. I don't know where you're at as a learner. When we go to level 1, this is what we call as beginning. So the generic language we have is, as a student, I'm not comfortable with this content or skill. I'm not really sure what is going on. I need help to be able to do any of the material or very much of it. So this would be, when we think about those level 2 skills, the vocabulary, those basic skills. This is a student who's just entering this conversation and is still learning the vocabulary, still learning those basic skills. So we're not there yet. When we jump up to a 2.5, this is where it might get a little bit confusing, but we need something between a 3 and a 2. So I'm gonna sort of back up and look at this 3, for example. You'll notice that for this example, the standard has multiple components. You need to be able to do all of these before you are at a level 3. And so if I had an assessment where a student was able to do some of those, but not all of them, I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable um, saying that they're level 3, because I wouldn't want to give the information that you've reached your total goal, because you haven't. And so that's where a 2.5 comes into play, where I'm almost comfortable with the content or skill, but I'm hung up on maybe one or two things, and I need to improve to be before we can confidently say we're at a level 3. And then that brings us to level 4. And I don't want us to confuse. Oftentimes, when kids or parents will see that there's something higher than something else, then being anything but that is a failure. Um, and that is the thinking we want to definitely get away from. Level 3 is success. Level 3, if I had to be pinned down and tie a percentage or a grade to it, which I definitely do not, and I don't want you to read that much into it, but a level 3 would be an A. It would be, if I had to, maybe it's a 93 or a 95%, right? So it's still, you're exceeding, you were succeeding at a very high level. Again, remember looking at that science standard. It's written at a very complex thinking level. So what is a 4? A 4 is I'm extremely comfortable with the content or skill. I can explain it to another student. I can apply it in brand new situations. Basically what it means is I can kind of go beyond what was explicitly taught in class, and I can apply this in more complicated ways. And I'll give you a more concrete kind of basic example of that with this bicycle example. So I have recently been working to teach my daughter how to ride a bike. And the goal is, right? My goal for her is that she can ride a bike on her own, regardless of the conditions, whether it's a bumpy road, whether it's downhill, uphill, whether it's a sidewalk or a big open area. I want her to be confident and able to ride a bike. And I'm not going to feel that way until she can demonstrate some very specific things for me. But I'm not going to start there in my education on her riding a bike. Where am I going to start? Well, hopefully I start early on, maybe with a balance bike or practicing pedaling on a tricycle when she was very young. So that would be kind of like at the level 1, is like I'm sort of riding a bike, but not really. Like I need a lot of help. I'm not successful yet. So then we look at what goes at a level 2. And so I was thinking about this, and I thought, well, being able to pedal kind of confidently, and this is something that she struggled with early on. She kept trying to start the bike and would pedal backwards on accident, right? Trying to get going. Um, Being able to start and stay upright for a brief amount of time with a push, right? Like being able to sort of like, okay, you got you going, and now you can kind of pedal around. Being able to turn. My daughter was very good about turning left, but turning right was a problem, especially if maybe there was like an obstacle out in the way. And this was all, by the way, like in the gym in a very safe, controlled way. Um, and then maybe a 2 would be can perform level 3 content, but with maybe training wheels, right? Needing that extra support. And so we're doing pretty good. My daughter, I wouldn't say she can ride a bike yet, because she can ride a bike pretty well, but in a controlled condition. So she is more at this level 2.5, where she can pretty much always get started. She doesn't usually fall down when the bike stops, but she gets really nervous if there's an obstacle that she has to like go left or right around. She kind of panics and ends up stopping. So she's not at a level 3. I'll know that she's a level 3 when she can do that confidently in a controlled condition, and then can take it outside to the sidewalk and around people and cars and other conditions that don't cause her problem. That's when I'll know she's at a 3. So what's a 4? I'm not really going to teach her how to be a 4, but there is that opportunity, of course, to take riding a bike to that next level. So that could be something like learning how to pop a wheelie, jumping over ramps, maybe competing in a BMX competition, or other stunts like that. That's when, like, that's not what I taught. That wasn't the goal, but you have now shown me beyond what we have taught. So that's a kind of a very basic level, but hopefully something to help you get your head around what a proficiency scale does. So, how are proficiency scales used in the classroom? Well, we want them to be in a kid friendly language, and we want them to be in kids' hands. They should be used to clearly articulate what it takes for a kid to achieve certain levels of proficiency. So, there's no surprises. They know they're at a level 2 because they can do these things. They know they're not at a level 3 yet because they can't do these things, but now they know what it is they need to attain. For that matter, if you think about how we learn and think about that bike example, early on in the first maybe week or two of working on a standard, kids may not be able to demonstrate they're at a 3 because we haven't taught that yet. We're still teaching the basics. So some early tests and assessments might just show a level 2 because that's all we're really testing. And I'll talk briefly about that a little bit later. We want them to be used by students to track their growth. A lot of teachers are implementing different trackers to go with this so they can track their different tests and assessments that they take, and be able to show and see where they are. We want them to use them for goal setting. Teachers are using them to really guide the progression of learning, to figure out who needs intervention and who needs enrichment. And then, of course, they are used to make very targeted assessments because in order to figure out where a kid is, we need to be able to ask very specific questions about what they know. So when we talk about assessing the standards, there's two things. Everything we do in class is broken up really into two categories. Category one is a learning opportunity. And these are all of the daily activities and assignments that kids do um, to get practice and to attain the skills and concepts that we're trying to teach them. So it's that daily practice, could be class discussions, group activities, homework, any number of things. When we're talking about an assessed event, that's when we are getting very specific about figuring out what kids know. An assessed event is really then any other activity that's used to determine what a kid knows on a concept after they've had a chance to learn it, practice it, and get feedback on it. So this is a very big, broad category, and there may even be some overlap between the two, um, depending on when a class discussion happens. It could be an assessed event or it could be a learning opportunity. Um, assessed events are anything from a traditional sort of short quiz to a test. It could also be a short writing sample, or it could be an essay, and anything in between. A conversation can even be an assessed event. If I have a conversation with a kid about a scientific phenomenon and they have trouble writing it on a test, but they can communicate it to me very clearly, then why wouldn't I want to give them credit for understanding that content? If that is all I'm assessing is, do they know and can they apply? So really anything that's used to determine what a student has learned, again, after they've had a chance to get comfortable with it, would be an assessed event. All right. So now that I've given some assessed events in my class, now it's time for me to determine, like I'm at the end of the standard, we've taught all the content. What is the student's score on this standard? And so if we look at a very basic example, here's a kid who, again, started off with very little prerequisite information and then very quickly learned the basics and demonstrated that they're growing. And on the final event, they got a 3. Well, this student's overall score, we would say, is a 3, depending on these assessments and what they're asking, if I've done a good job of writing them, because they've been able to demonstrate that they have grown to a 3. And here is the key piece of standards-based grading compared to maybe a traditional system, that more weight is obviously given to the last assessed event, again, depending how it's written. But most importantly, what's happening is we're not punishing kids for the length of time that it took them to learn the material. So if this had been more of a traditional system, and let's say like this was an F and a couple D's and a B, and then finally getting an A, there's no way that would average out to be an A. But yet the kid has demonstrated that they know what we asked them to learn. So we don't want to penalize them for the length of time that it took them to achieve that knowledge. Here's another example. This student, again, took a little bit longer and never really got to where they needed to be, never really achieved the standard. And so their overall score would be a 2. However, here's the key thing is that at least until the class ends at the end of the year, if it's a year-long class, the student is going to have multiple opportunities, and some of it might be they have to take that initiative um, to continue to demonstrate what they know within this concept. So this could be a concept that circles back, and so they have other opportunities to demonstrate to the teacher. And so this might be their score at the end of this unit in September, but then by the end of the year they're able to demonstrate, you know what, I got this figured out because we built on it. Now I know it, and then I as a teacher would be able to reassess and then give them a higher score if they can demonstrate it. Again, the goal is the what do they know, um, not how long it took them to get there. One other key component of our system is our PRIDE scores. So anybody who's spent any time at Liberty knows that we use the acronym PRIDE. PRIDE stands for Positive, Respectful Individuals Who Demonstrate Excellence. And so we know that when we take homework out of the mix, a lot of people are worried that, okay, well, students won't do that. And so what we want to do is we still want to give a score for the academic behavior and the that students have. Um, what we want to do though is take it out of their academic score. It wouldn't make any sense to say yes, you know how to um, do everything there is to do with photosynthesis. You understand the concept inside and out, but your homework, you haven't really done your homework very consistently. So I'm not going to give you that 3. I'm going to give you a 2. That really doesn't make any sense because in standards-based grading, the score for the standard is just based on do they know that standard. That doesn't mean these other things aren't important. So we track that through our PRIDE score. So every week in each class, students will receive a PRIDE score. And this should have been sent home to you. This should be available, and you can pause this video and spend more time looking at this. But essentially, again, we look at a 3. The student almost always meets classroom expectations for academic behavior, and that is referring to: am I participating in classroom discussions? Am I turning in my homework? Am I putting in effort to learn? And they demonstrate respect for self and others, the school rules and expectations. Are they following classroom routines and respecting property? So again, this is like, how are you behaving in class? This used to be known as like a participation score in the old traditional system. And it's still important to keep track of that because now we can set goals. If we're not meeting expectation, then we can document that and now set goals for growth. So the next piece of this conversation is how are we going to document and communicate these scores to parents and students? And that's where we talk about Skyward. For those of you who are familiar with Skyward, you're going to notice that it looks a little bit different. And so I'm here to orient you on what you're looking at. When you pull up the grade book and this is a science class, you'll see that there are multiple categories where the standards are gathered together. For example, there's going to be earth science standards, which aren't visible right now until you hit the little caret and open it up. There's life science standards and there's physical science standards, as well as engineering and technology. So you can see that the physical science standard has been opened up so that we can see what's in there. If you look over here, these little book icons, if you click on this book, it should give you more information about the physical science. All right, so now when we take a closer look, you'll see these individual categories here. These are the standards that we're scoring on. So develop a model to describe the anatomy or the atomic, and I don't know what the rest of it says, and you can open it up. What you'll see here is in this class right now, we've been focusing on 2 of these standards. So analyze and interpret data on the something or other. And there are 2 assessed events that are entered. And you can see the scores that the students have got on those assessed events. So this is taken from it's early in the year. I know it's mid-October, but we've still got a long way to go. And so this class has been focusing on these 2 standards, and these are the assessed events that go with it. Eventually, what will happen is at the end, the teacher is going to look at all the assessed events that go under this analyze and interpret data standard, and there will likely be more. And then they'll look at all those scores like we did on that last page, and then they'll give a score to the overall standard. And then you can see we've got one standard here with a kid got a score of 2 on this assessed event. As we go down here, you'll see here are the weekly pride scores that have been given, and they've been documented here. At the end of the trimester, we will have a progress report. And now this is just a snapshot. The report card isn't done being created yet, but this goes to show all of the different standards that are being covered. So for example, in our health fitness classes, you can see we've got all of our health standards and we have all of our fitness standards, as well as our pride scores. So as we go early on in the year, so at the first trimester, we would expect to see a couple of these filled in by the time the trimester ends. But some of these things won't be covered until the end of the year, so they won't have any scores in them. And the same is true everywhere else. Here's a math class. You can see the different categories that they are going to be covering, and then each of these are the individual standards. Each of these standards have their own proficiency scales, like we looked at, and there'll be at least 3. The goal is at least 3 assessed events that'll go into helping us figure out what the overall score is for that standard. All right, so this is our quick look at standards-based grading. And the thing I want to just kind of bring to your attention is that just like our students, the staff is embarking on this. This is a new learning experience for them as well. We've been working on it and learning and studying, but implementation is relatively new. So this is going to be an ongoing process where we try things, we fail at them, we grow at them, we make changes, we reflect, we refine, and this is not something that's going to be perfect this year or maybe ever. This is a learning process that will continue, and so just like the students, they're growing and they're learning, and we're doing the same. I hope this presentation has given you an opportunity to get some of your questions answered. If you have additional questions, I have created a link here, and you can go to this link and fill out a questionnaire. It's basically a way for you to submit questions, and then we'll respond to your questions. This slideshow will be available as well, and so you can go through the slideshow and then just click this link, or you can type it into your browser and go from there. Thank you for your attention. I'm sure I'm way over 20 minutes, and I appreciate your attention.